Imagine this, you're standing in the middle of a crowded freeway, but everything is dead silent. Thousands of cars around you, perfectly still, headlights on, drivers motionless, each frozen in a posture of mild anticipation. And then you realize they're not parked. They're waiting. Engines idling. Lives idling. All of them staring at a horizon that never moves. Retirement. It's the grand illusion. The finish line we've been told to sprint toward our whole lives. Work hard, save more, delay pleasure, defer dreams, and then finally you'll be free. That's the myth. That's the lie. And it's been sold with such precision that few ever dare to question it until they are already deep into the sacrifice. By then, the cost is sunken. The prison walls invisible. But make no mistake, they are there. The idea of retirement as we know it is a relatively modern invention. It gained momentum during the Industrial Revolution and was cemented into culture by social systems and corporate interests. Its promise is simple: suffer now so you can live later. But the deeper question is, who defined what living means? And why does the system that promised you eventual freedom so often leave you feeling more trapped as the years go by? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what happens when that privilege is postponed indefinitely? When self-actualization is a bullet point on a bucket list instead of the core of your existence? You were not born to retire. You were born to evolve. And yet, retirement culture encourages stagnation. It's cloaked in comfort, but the texture is numbness. Our society paints a portrait of success where you reach your golden years with enough money to stop doing anything meaningful. But meaning cannot be deferred. Fulfillment has an expiration date, and for many, it's sooner than you think. Arthur Schopenhauer, the grim yet lucid philosopher, noted that satisfaction consists in freedom from pain, which is the positive element of life. Think about that. We are told to endure decades of pain, mental, emotional, and physical, in order to reach a life stage supposedly free from it. But that freedom rarely comes, because pain and meaning often come from the same source: effort, struggle, becoming. And by the time people reach retirement, many discover a truth that should have been evident all along. Comfort alone does not nourish the soul. Retirement is not the reward. It is often the slow death of the inner self. The reward was supposed to be the journey, alive, painful, ever-changing. But the system teaches us to trade our vitality for security, and then sells us back watered-down versions of freedom in the form of cruises, golf courses, and leisure. But leisure without purpose is just anesthesia. Friedrich Nietzsche, the prophet of will, wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if you spend 40 years obeying the how without ever discovering your why? The corporate world rarely gives space for existential introspection. It rewards performance, not purpose. So we perform, we conform, we overfunction in roles we never questioned, and underfunction in lives we never designed. We silence our inner discontent with pay raises and promotions, convincing ourselves that success is an adequate substitute for freedom. But deep down, you've always known, it isn't. Aldous Huxley warned us in Brave New World that people would not be oppressed by fear, but seduced by pleasure. And here we are, lulled into docility not by violence but by visions of gated communities and early bird specials. Dreams shrink when they are deferred long enough, and eventually we forget we even had them. This is not about hating retirement. It's about seeing it clearly. It's about confronting the lie that freedom begins when work ends. Because real freedom, the kind Viktor Frankl described as the last of human freedoms, begins with meaning, not with leisure, not with safety, and certainly not with waiting. So the question becomes, are you living to retire or retiring from living? We've confused pause with purpose, escape with evolution. But you cannot evolve by waiting. You evolve by confronting, by engaging, by choosing. And that brings us to the next chapter of this truth. How society engineers this illusion. How it taught you, from the earliest age, to believe that deferring your life was noble, productive, and inevitable. There's a moment in childhood, subtle but seismic, when imagination begins to give way to instruction. You stop building castles in the air and start filling in the blanks. You're taught to color inside the lines, both literally and existentially. This is where the programming begins. From an early age, you're given a script. It's not spoken outright, but it's embedded in every reward system, Every standardized test, every dinner table conversation that asks, what do you want to be when you grow up? Not who, what. Your identity from the beginning is tied to function, to output, to job titles, to what role you will play in the economy. We aren't told to discover ourselves. We're told to plan ourselves. And what's the end of that plan? Retirement. But the plan isn't yours. It's a narrative manufactured to maintain the machine. Go to school. Get a degree. Get a job. Get promoted. Buy the house. Save up. Retire. Die. It's not a life. It's a production line. And the most sinister part? It's sold to you as freedom. This is the genius of modern culture. It chains you with invisible handcuffs. You don't fight your captivity because you believe you chose it. But no child chooses to delay joy for 5 decades. No soul cries out in infancy, please, let me be compliant. That desire is taught, conditioned. Jean-Paul Sartre's existential lens exposes this absurdity with surgical clarity. Man is condemned to be free, he wrote, because with consciousness comes the burden of choice. Yet, instead of embracing this freedom, we flee from it, preferring the structure of expectation to the anxiety of self-determination. We become what others want us to be. We internalize goals that were never ours. This programming isn't merely psychological, it's cultural, institutional, even economic. Schools don't teach introspection. They teach performance. Few curriculums offer space to explore the question, what does it mean to live well? That would be dangerous. Because a generation that ponders meaning might not buy into the long-term productivity trap. It might not measure life in paychecks and pensions. Think of how early we're taught to delay. You're told not to pursue what excites you, but what's practical. Not what nourishes the soul, but what pays. And if you're lucky, you're promised you can do what you love later, after the mortgage, after the kids, after the career. And then, when your bones ache and your fire dims, then you can finally live. This is not planning. This is postponement on a societal scale. Schopenhauer once observed that men are not free to do what they want because they are not free to want what they want. Our desires are shaped, manufactured by the forces around us. We are nudged toward careers that reflect market demand, not soul hunger. We are praised for sacrifices that lead to burnout, not transcendence. And so, we adapt. We suppress the still, small voice that whispers about meaning and light a candle instead to efficiency, upward mobility, and quarterly performance reviews. But efficiency without direction is just speed toward nowhere. The machinery of modern life thrives on your obedience, not your curiosity, not your rebellion, not your wild, inconvenient yearning to feel truly alive. And so you're told, wait until you're older, more stable, more prepared, and then wait some more. By the time many people retire, they're so exhausted by postponement that they no longer remember what they were waiting for. They try to fill the void with hobbies or travel, but something is missing. Something essential. And it's not time. It's vitality, purpose, alignment. Aldous Huxley warned that the real hopeless victims of mental illness are to be found among those who appear most normal. The well-adjusted worker, the punctual pensioner, the polite, quiet sufferer of postponed dreams. This is the quiet horror of a life unlived. Not dramatically tragic, just muted, structured, safe, and ultimately empty. You were not made to be an efficient cog in someone else's machine. You were made to become, to stretch, to inquire, to burn with a purpose that is uniquely yours. So why didn't anyone teach you how to find it? Because the system profits from your delay. It feeds on your deferral. And as long as you're busy obeying the script, you're not writing your own. The next piece of this puzzle, perhaps the most haunting, is what happens when you finally arrive at retirement only to realize that the freedom you were promised doesn't feel free at all. Picture this, the day has come. You've walked out of your office, handed in the badge, the keys, the identity. There's cake in the break room, balloons that say happy retirement, a card filled with signatures from people who barely knew you. And then you go home. It's quiet. For the first time in years, your calendar is empty. No emails, no meetings, no expectations, but also no direction. The moment that was supposed to be your liberation feels strangely hollow. Not because rest isn't important, but because for decades rest was framed as the reward, the final prize, the justification for everything you endured. And now that it's here, it doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like an identity crisis in disguise. Retirement is often marketed like a secular salvation, a place where all suffering is redeemed by ease. But here's the truth. Ease without meaning becomes torment. Leisure without growth curdles into stagnation. And for those who bought into the retirement myth completely, what awaits is not paradise, but a quiet erosion of self. The reason is existential, not economic. You can have all the money in the world, but if your days lack purpose, you are spiritually bankrupt. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, knew this truth intimately. Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, he wrote, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. When retirement becomes the goal instead of a chapter, it warps your entire trajectory. You organize your life around the idea of escape. Escape from labor, escape from pressure, escape from having to become. But escape is not the same as freedom. Freedom is active. Escape is passive. Freedom is movement. Escape is retreat. And for many retirees, what was promised as a grand arrival turns into a slow unraveling. You begin to ask, who am I when I'm no longer producing? What is my value without the identity of work? What fills the space where urgency used to live? But here's the secret no one tells you. You were never meant to stop becoming. Friedrich Nietzsche warned against the last man, a creature who chooses comfort over greatness, safety over struggle, predictability over passion. The last man is not evil. He is simply sedated, numbed by routine and robbed of the fire that once made life dangerous and luminous. Retirement culture often breeds this final form of the last man. Safe, routine-driven, uninspired, a calendar filled with distractions, but no destination. A life that has traded in all its questions for certainty, and in doing so, lost its pulse. And it's not just psychological. Studies have shown that a significant percentage of people experience depression, cognitive decline, or physical deterioration shortly after retirement. Not because their bodies fail them, but because their purpose does. The structure falls away, and with it, the scaffolding of identity. This is not to say retirement is inherently bad. Rest is necessary. Reflection is sacred. But rest without a new reason to rise? That's a soft death. That's the haunting silence that follows decades of noise and motion. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that existence precedes essence, meaning we are not born with a predetermined essence. We create ourselves through our choices. Retirement, in this light, should not be the end of becoming. It should be a reawakening, a re-entry into life on your own terms. But most people are never taught how to choose. They're taught how to obey. So when the commands stop, when no one tells them what to do anymore, they freeze. They drift. And drifting becomes decay. And here lies the final cruelty of the retirement myth. It convinces you to delay your passions, only to leave you unprepared to pursue them when the time finally comes. The muscle of meaning, long unused, has atrophied. The dream, neglected, has died quietly in some drawer labeled someday. But someday is a graveyard for the unlived life. You were never meant to stop asking hard questions. You were never meant to reach a point where the search ends. Meaning is not a mountain you summit. It's the soil you cultivate every day, especially when the world stops demanding anything from you. The next question then becomes essential. If retirement doesn't bring freedom, then what does? In the following section, we'll uncover the architecture of true freedom. Not the one sold to you in advertisements, but the one philosophers, rebels, and mystics have spoken of for centuries. The kind of freedom that doesn't begin at 65. The kind that begins the moment you reclaim your life. Security is the unspoken god of modern society. We are taught to pursue it relentlessly. Financial security, job security, emotional security. Every life choice is filtered through its lens. And yet, beneath that promise of stability lies an eerie paradox. The more we seek security, the more life begins to feel like a prison. Freedom and security are not the same. In fact, they are often at odds. The retirement myth hinges on the illusion that security is the highest good. It tells you to build a fortress, 401ks, pensions, real estate, insurances, so that one day you can finally live without fear. But here's the deception. You can't buy your way out of fear, and you can't stockpile vitality. Life, in its essence, is uncertain. and pretending otherwise only leads to quiet desperation. Viktor Frankl, who stared into the abyss of human suffering in Nazi death camps, understood the unbearable cost of certainty. He wrote, "What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal. This is the key. The soul does not thrive in safety alone. It thrives in pursuit, in purpose, in the electric tension between who you are and who you are becoming." But the retirement model strips that away. Says, arrive here and you can stop striving. Be done. Be still. Be safe. But safe from what? From failure, from reinvention, from uncertainty. Those are the very ingredients of an authentic life. To remove them is not to gain freedom, it is to lose your aliveness. Arthur Schopenhauer, often criticized for his pessimism, had a stunning insight when he said, "A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. You are not as free as you think if your desires have been implanted, if they serve the system more than the soul. Wanting security may seem natural, but much of that desire is engineered. It is engineered by industries that benefit from your compliance, financial firms that promise peace through portfolio management, corporations that dangle retirement benefits as carrots, social norms that mock risk and glorify routine. All of it conspires to keep you aiming for predictability instead of possibility. But real freedom? It's messy, uncertain, and absolutely necessary. Freedom is not about owning your time, it's about owning your choices. It's not about retiring from work, it's about working from alignment. Doing what matters not because you've earned the right to, but because you were born to. Every philosopher worth reading, Nietzsche, Jung, Kierkegaard, Frankl, Sartre, understood this one thing: freedom without meaning is emptiness. And meaning rarely fits neatly into a retirement plan. Aldous Huxley foresaw a future where people would be controlled not through tyranny, but through pleasure, where freedom would be drowned in comfort. We're living in that future now. We mistake convenience for liberation. We mistake comfort for peace. But there is a deep difference between resting from a life of meaning and collapsing into one that never was. You want to feel free? Then do not ask what makes you safe. Ask what sets you ablaze. Ask what makes you come alive. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this radical freedom, the power to define yourself in every moment. But this kind of freedom demands responsibility. It demands consciousness. It demands that you see through the myth you've been handed and start crafting a truth of your own. You can feel it, can't you? That restlessness. The tragedy of the retirement myth is not that it fails to deliver what it promises, but that it keeps you from seeking what your spirit truly craves: depth, challenge, authenticity. So if you want real freedom, the question is not when can I retire? The question is, what is worth building a life around today? And to find that answer, we must turn inward, to the part of you that has always known there is something more. In the next section, we will explore that place, that sacred fire, the call that never stops whispering even through the noise of obligation. There's a voice inside you. You've heard it before. Not the voice that tells you to be practical. Not the voice that checks your calendar or reminds you to pay the bills. The other voice, the one you buried, the one that spoke in your dreams when you were young, wild and sacred dreams, irrational, inconvenient, untamed by the world's expectations. It whispered things like, create, wander, teach, build something no one has ever seen. Don't settle. You didn't ignore that voice because you didn't believe it. You ignored it because the world taught you to. Not with cruelty, but with kindness, by telling you to be realistic, to think ahead, to prepare. You can always come back to those dreams, they said. But you never did, because the path of preparation never ends. There's always one more promotion, one more financial goal, one more obligation. And so, the voice faded. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the becoming of the self. Not the mask you wear for society, but the full, integrated totality of who you are. He warned that if you do not listen to the self, it will turn against you. It will manifest as anxiety, depression, addiction, or nihilism. Symptoms of a soul denied. The retirement lie doesn't just delay the self, it distorts it. You spend decades identifying with your role, your status, your productivity. Then, one day, those vanish. And what's left? If you haven't cultivated the deeper self, the answer is terrifying: nothing. An empty shell drifting toward death, comforted only by habit. But the voice never fully dies. It waits, quietly, underneath the noise. And the most radical act of reclaiming your life is this: to listen again. Listening doesn't mean quitting your job tomorrow or abandoning your responsibilities. It means getting honest. It means asking the questions you've avoided. If I didn't have to prove anything, what would I do with my time? What parts of me have I starved in the name of being practical? Where in my life have I been obedient instead of true? The voice often speaks in discomfort, in the dissatisfaction you feel on Sunday nights, in the way your heart sinks in routine meetings, in the strange longing you feel when you see someone else living freely, fully, on their own terms. It's easy to label that envy. But what if it's recognition? What if it's yourself reminding you this was supposed to be you too? Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." Not find who you are, become. It's an active process, a fiery one. It involves confronting the lies you've accepted, peeling away the layers of who you were told to be, and stepping into the unknown terrain of who you might become. It's terrifying, but it's real. And here's the paradox: the voice doesn't always scream. It whispers. It lives in the moments when you are most still, when the performance fades, when you're not trying to be anything for anyone. It speaks in silence, but only if you're brave enough to stop filling your life with noise. In the architecture of the self, there are rooms you've never entered. Some hold sorrow, others passion, many power. You'll never reach them by following a map drawn by someone else. You have to make your own way. That's what freedom really demands, not just action, but attention. Not just movement, but depth. This is not a call to recklessness. It's a call to remembering. Remembering what it felt like before the world told you who to be. Remembering that you are not a job title, not a resume, not a retiree waiting for the clock to release you. You are still becoming. And you always were. Even now, the voice waits. Not as a punishment, but as an invitation. It's not too late to listen. It's not too late to begin again, not in some cliché self-help sense, but in the deep, existential sense. Life didn't forget you. You just need to remember yourself. Because in the end, the real tragedy is not that we die. The real tragedy is that we die having never truly lived. In the final section, we will walk toward that truth, what it means to live now without waiting, and how to reimagine the idea of a life that never needs to retire from its own essence. No one teaches you how to live. They teach you how to comply, how to manage, how to perform. But living? That's something you're expected to figure out after you've given your best years away. But by then, you're tired. The muscles of wonder, spontaneity, risk, they've gone unused. And so you stare at your life, all the empty space left after retirement, and you ask the question you were never prepared to answer: what now? This question, when faced honestly, cracks open everything. Because deep down, you already know, life was never meant to be a straight line toward a distant reward. You were never supposed to defer your soul's calling in exchange for a neatly organized existence. You were meant to burn, brightly, relentlessly, urgently. Not in your final chapter, but from the beginning. And yet, the lie persists: sacrifice now so you can live later. But later is not guaranteed. And even when it arrives, it often comes with a heaviness. You're no longer who you were. You've worn the mask for so long, it's fused to your skin. You don't just need more time. You need resurrection. What if you didn't need to wait? Imagine a life where meaning wasn't the afterthought, but the compass. Where your days were sculpted not by what is expected, but by what is essential. Where the idea of retirement becomes irrelevant. Not because you're forever hustling, but because your work and your life are no longer at odds. Because your existence is not a preparation for living. It is living. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or chasing thrill for its own sake. It means taking responsibility for your essence, for the soul you've been neglecting, for the life you know is possible, even if you've never seen it modeled. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that sacred pause, is where life can be reclaimed. You don't have to throw everything away. You only have to stop living on autopilot. Ask yourself, where am I still pretending? What do I do because it's expected, not because it's true? What would I regret not doing if I had 5 years left? 1, a single month? These are not hypothetical. These are the keys to everything. You've been waiting to arrive somewhere, to be done. But what if life is never something you complete, only something you inhabit more deeply? Jean-Paul Sartre once declared, "Life has no meaning the moment you lose the illusion of being eternal." That illusion, that time is abundant, that your real life is just around the corner, is the very thing that steals your urgency, your depth, your courage. This is your moment. Not tomorrow, not the day you retire, not the day your schedule clears. Now, because you don't need permission to live truthfully. You don't need a retirement party to start again. You only need the clarity to see through the lie and the courage to say, I will not wait any longer. Your life is not something to escape from, and it's not something to endure until a better one arrives. It's the raw, terrifying, beautiful terrain you are meant to walk, awake, sovereign, fully engaged. So reimagine retirement, not as the end, but as a warning. A signal that says, don't wait until it's too late. Reclaim your creativity. Rekindle your inner fire. Reinvent not your career, but your capacity for joy, for meaning, for presence. Let your freedom be measured not by your calendar, but by your connection to yourself, to others, to the moment. Let your life be not a strategy, but a stance. Not a deferral, but a declaration. You are not running out of time. You are standing in it. And the real question isn't, when can I be free? It's this, what will I do with the freedom I already have?